Hey there, good morning and welcome to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock, heavy metal, hard rock, and other rock genres of music. So today we're here to do a new type of video, which was suggested by one of my subscribers. And I had been working on it a little bit, but now I'm going to put it out for this person because they asked for it. It's going to be my top 25 favorites. Okay, in this case, it's my top 25 favorite bands. They had asked for 20, but I had already been thinking 25 might be a better number for me. Not too many, but not too few. I decided on a cutoff point based on my familiarity with the bands, mostly. The bands below 25 and that, I have a lot of bands I like below that level, but I don't have as much familiarity with the ones in the bottom half of my favorites as I do in the top half. Okay, so here we go. We're going to do this today. Top 25, I'm going to do it in reverse order. That seems to be the standard way to handle these things, and I like to fit in, so I'm going to do it that way. So we'll start with number 25 and go all the way up to number 1. Now, my top 7 have been pretty much my top 7 for the past 20 years or so. That's when I formed the group of 7, which I thought these groups are all pretty close, except for maybe the top 2 might be a little higher. Top 1 for sure. But the other 3 through 7 have all switched places gradually over years and gone back and up and down. But pretty much the same group of 7. It did expand once to group of 8, but that was with a non-band artist who I will do at a different time. I'm excluding all of my top artists, as you might put it, some solo artists, some individuals, some that have a band but it's kind of basically on them, but others, so as long as they have that group. So my kind of criteria for this is that they're a band of guys who have equal, or a band with a band name, put out more than one album with that name, and who I have a great affinity for. So these are my definitive top 25 bands. Now, I want to make sure I'm clear about this. These are not the 25 best rock bands in history. If that was the case, it'd be a totally different list. However, these are my personal favorites, ones that I like and enjoy the most. Some of them have had long histories with me, some as far back as 1975. Others more recently, in the last year or so, based on recommendations from friends or from other sites that I like to watch. I've had some recommended. There was one particular band that was recommended, wasn't recommended specifically to me, but the person put on a nice kind of video about it, and it intrigued me, and I went out and I bought about 8 albums offline one day, and 2 of them were from this particular band. And I'll get into all that as I go along. But anyways, I just wanted to preface all this stuff so people know where I'm coming from for this video. Okay, so we're going to start. And at the end, of course, I will do some honorable mentions. There's 5 bands on my honorable mention list that I wanted to include because they could jump up and be on this top 25 on a given day. I tend to be very... think things through quite a bit before I give a band a move up. They don't just move up just because I happen to like one particular album. It has a lot to do with the band dynamics, how they are as a band, where they're from, the type of music they're playing, their consistency with good albums versus, maybe a slacker here or there, or, their general overall appearance. A lot of things are factors here. And they all boil down into how I feel about the band personally, and for this particular thing, that's what I'm going on, how I feel about the band in a particular sense. Not, maybe this band is more technically better, or maybe that band's produced more great albums, but overall, I just like this band for, and I'll tell you the reasons as we go along. So anyways, back to where I was, which is we're going to do the top 25, and I'm going to start with my number 25 band. Before I start, one last thing. I did put my top 7 up here. I put it there, my favorite album from each band up there. And I put it back there just to give me kind of motivation for this whole thing. So here we go. Number 25 is a band whose album, number one, to me, they're my favorite album by this band, was my favorite album for a good 30 years, and only has been recently in the last couple of years come down to like number 2 or so, you know. And it's basically, it's not that I like the album any less, it's just some other albums have grown quite a bit. This album has kind of worn on me a bit too over years because I played it so much, and it's kind of an oddball for this group because I don't really like a lot of their other stuff. I don't dislike it. I will listen to it, but it's not a go-to type band for me. But they are, based on the strength of this album and the fact that they're a Canadian power trio, and that this album is so strong that I put them in the number 25 spot today, and that could change. And the band I've chosen is Triumph from Toronto, with featured Gil Moore, Rick Emmett, and Mike Levine. Now I know there's been other members of Triumph since then, but this is the band from the album Just a Game that I really enjoyed, and some of the stuff around that I liked quite a bit too. Pretty good band, like solid, like musicianship, especially Rick Emmett. The guy is a top guitar player as far as I'm concerned, and the other two guys complement him quite well. They maybe get unfairly compared to other Canadian power trios, which we'll get into later, but fantastic band. If you haven't listened to Triumph, give them a listen. Okay, my number 24 band is a recent addition to my top bands. I had heard about them before. I'd listened to a track or two from different people, but never really got into them until till the guy from Sea of Tranquility made a video on their music, and I was intrigued by it so much I went out and I ordered a couple of videos, a couple of CDs off of them, and I've been listening through the one that he most recommended first, and that is a Tab in the Ocean, and of course we're talking about Nectar. Now there's, as he said, and I'm not paraphrasing. I'm going to paraphrase here. I'm not going to try to direct comment, but he said that this band is not a German band, although they do often are associated with German bands because they did most of their early recording there and became big there initially. They are an English rock band, an English progressive rock band, and we're talking about Nectar. I love this band. Still fairly new to me. Maybe about a year I've been listening to them. Specifically the Tab in the Ocean, which is in my playlist and has been in my playlist now almost 7 months. It's still an album I listen to quite a bit. It's not even it's not even close yet to be removed. Usually when I wear an album out, I pull it out of my playlist and put something else in there. But this isn't even close to being worn out yet. So great band. I highly recommend them. If you are looking for new prog music, maybe you're a person who liked prog music quite a bit in the 70s and you're trying to get back into music and you'd like to listen to some newer, not newer, but something you haven't listened to before that's progressive and might fit into what you liked before, this is a great band for that. So Nectar, number 24. Number 23 is a band with a great kind of history. Their earlier stuff was more bluesy. I prefer their earlier stuff. However, they had a seminal album in the mid '80s. The band very much a bit of an old school band, but also they took to the kind of hair metal scene, fit into it very well. Although they are a little more than that. Like they're a lot more talented than most hair metal bands. So I don't really want to qualify them as a hair metal band. The album that they did very well at was, of course, one of the top albums of that year. A lot of great stuff on it. One of my favorite albums. And the vocalist has such a range. He almost has a Robert Plant sounding voice in some ways, but I think, and he's been very active in his entire career singing and music. So we're talking about Whitesnake, of course. Part of the Deep Purple family, we'll call it, but really, really good. Some really good albums they put out, and a lot of the stuff that I really like came before the '87 album era, and some of the stuff after is not as good. Had some great guitar players, a lot of like memorable songs. So the next band up, of course, is the band in which I just said was Deep Purple. This band, again, I've had a bit of a longer history with them. Maybe it dates back to my original music time, but I never really liked them much because I associate it, and this theme will come up a few times during my videos, where I heard a song by them that was overplayed, and I immediately attributed that song, and this was when I was younger, of course, to being that band's style and their music style, and it's not always the case. And if I didn't like the song or it was overplayed, it tended not to be a good mix for me. And we're talking about Deep Purple here because of Smoke on the Water. It took me a long time to overcome the fact that Smoke on the Water is just one song by a band. Somebody bought me a collection album. It might have been a live album, actually. I think it was Perfect Strangers. Yeah, that's the one. And I just was playing it in the background while I was cleaning, just looking for something different to listen to because I wear out most of my groups fairly quickly. Well, not quickly, but I wear them out over time because I have a tendency to listen to. I was more, as a younger person, I was more focused on just a smaller group of rock bands than I am now. I'm much more open to stuff now than I've ever been. So this album, I started playing this back in the 2005, 2007 era, and I really liked it. It really grew on me. It was one of those albums that kept playing in the background. Then I would start listening to it and taking it in the car and listening to it, and it became one of my favorite albums of the time. And then I kind of backed off a bit for a while and didn't get anything new from them. And I've recently, since I started this channel and in the last year or two, getting back into music a lot, I started buying stuff up from them, and I've since bought In the Fire and In Rock. Sorry, I don't know why I said In the Fire, but In Rock, and I bought Head Machine and a few others from them. And I've been getting into their music, and I really like quite a bit. I think Ian Gillan is one of the greatest rock vocalists of all time. You know, there's a difference between screeching, which there are notable guys who do this screeching stuff that really is irritating, in my opinion. Like, a little bit of it is fine, but like the constant part is good. But there's a 2 or 3 guys who can scream. I like to think of it as scream, who are really effective with it and just adds a lot to the music. And he is, of course, I think he's the king of that. And I really like Richie Blackmore's guitar playing, and the rest of the band is pretty solid too. So Deep Purple comes in at number 22. Number 21 is Blue Oyster Cult. For the longest time, I only owned the one Blue Oyster Cult album, and I played it a lot, and always meant to get more of their stuff. And it's only been in the again part of my resurgence again, and that I've started buying stuff from them. And the funny thing about Blue Oyster Cult is a lot of their music is different on every album, so it's almost like rediscovering a band every single album you get. And I've discovered that each of them kind of grows on me a little bit more each time I play it, and they come in at 21 for that reason. They're pretty inventive. Like, people used to say they were hard rock, heavy metal. I don't think they were ever really heavy metal. They may have had 1 or 2 heavy metal songs. I don't even think they were really hard rock. They just played a lot of different stuff, which, you know, they mixed fairly well. And you know, I like their stuff quite a bit. So they're number 21. Number 20 is completely unheavy. They do have a few heavy songs, but I wouldn't even call them even close to hard rock. They're more country rock than anything else. And they have some legendary tracks and some really great music. Their deep stuff is as good as their stuff they get on the radio, and the stuff they put on the radio is fantastic. So they're really quite a really well-formed band. I mean, they had a lot of their issues amongst each other, but coming in number 20 is the Eagles. Legendary rock band for a reason, you know. Great, some really great stuff. Now we start getting into the top 20, which top 20 have been pretty consistently in the top 20 for most of my musical career. Some of them have moved up, some of them have moved down. And we're going to start with heavy metal pioneers, Judas Priest. I don't have a lot of their stuff, but the stuff I have, I love. I have Defenders of the Faith and Screaming for Vengeance. Screaming for Vengeance was the first one I ever owned, and I love that album. One of the great heavy metal albums of all time. They have, I had British Steel, which I liked quite a bit, but it's a little more, I don't know how to say it, overplayed, I guess. Some of the songs on it are kind of overplayed. Defenders of the Faith I really like. It's an album I've been listening to a lot lately. And then I've got some other ones that I'm getting into as well. But just a fantastic band with, that classic kind of heavy metal sound that they pioneered. A lot of bands have followed in suit from them. Now, not being a huge heavy metal fan, I do like some heavy metal, but this is one of the bands I really like quite a bit. Judas Priest. 18 is kind of a... they can be heavy at times. They have some heavy songs. I think of them more as a kind of a heavy pop band. But they also have that kind of undertone of 50s style to their music as well, like the 1950s. Kind of that music, but it's kind of 70ish in its 50ish style, if that makes any sense to people. And I two of their albums, I think it was their third and fourth albums, plus one of their live albums have been overplayed for me. I play them a lot, or I did. I haven't played them as much in recent years, but I always go back to the one particular album all the time, and I love their guitar style. I love the vocalist, like just a lot of stuff about the group I really like, and that's Cheap Trick. They're number 18 for me. I think I discovered them when I was about 15 or 16. It was around that period of time where I had started to break away from Kiss, which was the only group I would listen to. I tend to be like that sometimes. I get into these one particular band and I'll just play them only. I did the same thing with Rush a bit. I did the same thing with Yes a bit, and I've gotten to a point where I don't really want to do that anymore because there's all kinds of stuff out there I'm missing out on because I'm spending too much time focusing on one particular band. So anyways, Cheap Trick came around in the 79 era for me, and I've liked them since then. I've never had a period of time where I haven't liked them. I haven't listened to their newer stuff as much. I tend to really, but I never get tired of their older stuff. So number 18, Cheap Trick. Number 17 is a California band who got pretty much big in BC, Vancouver area, and we're talking about Heart, of course. Ann Wilson, I think, is just one of the very best vocalists, either female or male, anywhere, ever. She just has a range that few people can master, can get to, at least not in the rock genre. There may be some in pop era or in rhythm and blues or whatever you want to call it, jazz. But for rock, she's one of the top ones. There was a period of time and when I got into them where I got into Little Queen and Magazine and Dog and Butterfly, and they just had this series of albums that came out that really put them on the map for me. And then they had that live album in the early 80s, which I think was fantastic. And you really get to see her vocal range on that. It's a really good live album. Anyways, so Heart comes in at number 17. Number 16, a band whose first 4 albums may be unrivaled by any other band's first 4 albums. I'd have to think about it quite a bit, but 1, 2, 3, 4. Fantastic. Not much separating them either. My favorite is probably the 4th one they put out, but not by much. Anyways, we're talking about Van Halen with its extraordinary sound. They had a great stage presence and show. Their guitarist is, of course, legendary. The rhythm section, very good. They just had an on stage presence, and of course, very few frontmen. David Lee Roth takes a backseat to nobody. He's the other kind of screamer that I like. I like his voice quite a bit. And he can do different things too. He's not just a heavy metal vocalist, which some people like to think this band was heavy metal, and they did have their heavy metal elements, but they also had their pop elements and their hard rock elements and even their kind of bluesy stuff and folky stuff as well. And I like all of it. I love all of their music. I really like some of the kind of folky stuff that they did, or the kind of rhythm and blues, because David Lee Roth has one of those voices. He can just do that really well. So Van Halen at number 16. Number 15, legendary, pulse pounding, high energy, album after album, singer after singer. They just keep pounding it out. They have a great stage show. They're well loved by the people who love them. One of the best followings, I think. They have some great tracks. They're not overly musically sophisticated, but they come up with this kind of musical formula that just really works well for them and for the people who love to listen to them. And if you're not a person that listens to this band, then I get it, because all their albums seem to be the same. But I like them quite a bit, and we're talking about AC/DC. I really liked Bon Scott. I think he's one of the most underrated vocalists of all time. Brian Johnson, though, say what you want about him, his voice is kind of harsh. But he came in and knocked it out of the park on his first album, and he did it very well, and he continues to do it very well, despite his age. They were very lucky to find a guy like that to replace Bon Scott, because that's not an easy replacement. But I still prefer Bon Scott. I just think he had more charisma and more personality, and he was just really likable, and he had a voice that kind of is, see me right out of the sunset. He just had that voice that was like unmistakably him, So there you go, AC/DC, and I love a lot of their stuff, especially their earlier stuff. All the stuff with Bon Scott I love. Some of the albums with Brian Johnson I really like quite a bit too. Okay, the number 14 band was my favorite band initially when I discovered rock. I didn't even really know what I was getting into at this time, but we taped a track off the radio on my friend's cassette, and played it a lot, and then we found a couple more, and we were listening to those too, and quite by accident I discovered another band which led me in a totally different direction. But this was my first kind of sauntering into rock and roll. At that time I was just listening to everything that my parents had, their country western, their 50s music, their folk music, and then I got into some kind of modern music at the time. I guess it was poppy, some disco-y stuff, some heavier stuff, but this band was my number one easily at the time. They were my favorite band, and that's BTO. I love Randy Bachman's guitar style. I love his vocals. I really love like Freddie's gravelly voice and the heavier stuff they did later that I discovered. But initially it was Quick Change Artist was the first song I had heard, and then there might have been a couple of like Hey You and something else that I had listened to, and that made them my favorite band. I didn't have a lot of other bands to compete with them, and they were number one. So moving up, we move up to the new, how do they call this? The new wave of British heavy metal. And these guys are the titans of that, the band that put that on the map. And many of the metal bands that play now are strongly influenced by this group. It may be the greatest metal band of all time. Hard to say. Certainly for a string of about 6 or 7 albums, they were right at the top. They are number 13 with me, and that's Iron Maiden. I like their logo. I like all the members of the band. I like their whole style. Just a fantastic group. Can't say enough about them. That, especially the Number of the Beast and the Peace of Mind albums are just great. Although I've never owned Killers, but I've heard lots of their tracks. That's quite a good album. Even though the vocalist is a bit different, still they just crunching along with these albums, man. And they've become more progressive, and they're still going, which is great. Like that's a hard genre to keep going after 30 years. Number 12 is a band who kind of had the same circumstances as Deep Purple. But it was more, with Deep Purple it was just a one song, but with this band, which is Pink Floyd, it was an entire album. I didn't really care for The Wall. I mean, there was 2 or 3 tracks on there I liked, but I thought the album was played too much and was given too much hype, and given too much credit. I don't think it was that great of an album. If they had just played it normally and hadn't overdone it and everything like that, maybe I would feel different about it, but I never really loved the album. I did own it, and I never played it a lot. I did play some of the tracks I liked. That's about it. But it kept me from listening to other Pink Floyd for a long time. I just thought, if this is the way this band sounds all the time, I'm not really interested. And it wasn't until one day I was out in a yard sale looking for stuff for my daughter, and I seen this Dark Side of the Moon. I said, hey, the guy was asking 50 cents for it, and I opened it up and checked it out, and it was in good condition. So I bought it for the 50 cents and started playing it in my car, and just really thought, wow, this is so good. Like, what would I have been missing? And that was probably in the turn of the century, maybe. Might have been a little earlier. It had to be in the turn of the century. My daughter was alive at the time, so probably it was like 2002 or 2003. I played it in the car all the time, and then I started really getting into them. And they've got some masterful albums. Dark Side of the Moon for a while was my favorite. Then I bought Animals, and that's now been my favorite. And you know, I've been listening to some other stuff by them too. So they're moved up quite a bit. A great band, fantastic. Number 11, I bought an album. Me and my friend were out one day when I bought this album. It was a pretty colorful album, but it had Ronnie James Dio on it, and so I had to have it because I love Ronnie James Dio, and I had come into knowing him from the Heaven and Hell album, and I had started looking for stuff that he had done previously, and this, of course, was the Rainbow's first album, which I liked quite a bit. It was a really good album. And then, because I liked it quite a bit, I was, in the record store, and I saw the Rainbow Rising, and so I took that home, and I thought, oh my God, what is this? Heavy album with heavy keyboards, like almost progressive rock, but not really, It had that Ronnie James Dio feel about it, and I just loved this album. Played it a lot. Put Rainbow on the map for me. They're number 11 for a reason, because they've had 2 or 3 really solid albums. I haven't listened to much of their stuff beyond the Joe Lynn Turner years, but I really quite like their music a lot. And, they're going to grow with me because I'm going to explore all this stuff as well. So number 10, a band that had a mega album that put them on the map for me and for many people, really. And I listened to this album a lot, and then I started saying, you know what, I like this band so much, I got to hear their other stuff, and I started buying up their previous albums, and some of those albums took a while, but because they were not as commercial as the other ones, but really solid albums. And so they have, to me, they have like 4 really, really good albums, and puts them into my top 10, which is Supertramp. I love their stuff. It's fantastic. I go back to it quite a bit. It's tough to be in the top 10 and hold that position, and they've held it for like a decade or more now. But I've been listening to them since the Breakfast in America album came out, and then the next one I got was Crime of the Century, because you heard that one on the radio, and then the other 2, Even Your Quietest Moments and Crisis What Crisis. Now, Crisis What Crisis is a very underrated album, and I think deserves a lot more love than it gets, but it's fantastic as well. So number 9 was the band that replaced BTO as my favorite band, and for when I heard that song on the radio and then I saw that album in the store, which was the very first album I ever owned, Kiss Alive was the album. From that point on, I just listened to day and night. I would only listen to Kiss. I got Kiss Alive, and then I eventually got Destroyer, and then Rock and Roll Over, and then I went back and got Hotter Than Hell, and the first Kiss album, and Dress to Kill, and then I lost Dress to Kill. I think, I can't remember, something happened to it. I don't know what happened, but anyways, I just got it again recently. And their discography from their onset till probably 1980, they were dominating for me, and up until about the middle of 78, when my friends started pushing sticks on me a bit, they were my favorite band by far. they were the only band, so they had no competition. I wouldn't listen to anybody else, just them. And then next up is number 8. They're just out of my group of 7. They've never actually been in my group of 7, but they've always been fairly high up with me. They're very high up with most people, I think. They have like some legendary musicians. They never put out a bad album. Maybe the last one because they didn't have a choice in that one, but and it wasn't even that bad, really. We're talking about Led Zeppelin here. Maybe the greatest rock band in history. They're not my personal favorites, but they never really put out any terrible songs. I mean, some people will cite this one or that one, but I don't have a problem with any of their music. I could listen to it. I wish they had continued. They might have been very different sounding if they'd continued, but for the albums they put out, they were all fantastic. I've only recently purchased the Presence, which is one of the ones I didn't have, and I'm really immersing myself in it. It's some great music, you know. So Led Zeppelin comes in at number 8. So the top 7 are definitive for me. They're my group of 7. They've been my group of 7 for at least 2 decades. Before that, it was just the top 5, and most of the top 5 has been in the band, been up there for a long time as well. So we come with number 7 is Jethro Tull, a band that has been as high as 4th place for me. I haven't bought a lot of stuff recently, and that's why they've kind of slipped a bit. And the last album I really, one of the last albums I really listened to quite a bit was their Crest of a Knave, and it was really different from their other stuff. Almost, when I took it home and started playing, I thought, oh my God, somebody put a Dire Straits album in here by accident. And I went and looked through it, and I said, no, it says Jethro Tull. And I listened to the whole album. It's so Dire Straits sounding. His voice is like kind of a lot more rough on this album as well. On that album as well. But Ian Anderson, fantastic musician. The guy can do just about anything. He's a great lyricist. He's a great music composer. And Martin Barry, one of the most underrated guitar players. Barlow, Barrymore, fantastic drummer. David Pegg and all these guys. It's fantastic musicianship. They put out in the 70s. Their discography is one of the greatest, I think. Just one great album after another, and they all don't actually sound very much alike. They seem to have a little earlier period, and then a mid period, and then a later period. Anyways, I really like Jethro Tull. They make my number 7. They've been as high as number 4, I think. Then we come to Black Sabbath, a band that was one of the 2 or 3 bands that started to make an impact when I started to get out of my Kiss era. Styx, Queen, Black Sabbath were the 3 bands that really had an impact on me. And then I discovered they put out an album because I found out, oh yeah, they lost their lead singer, so they were looking around and they got Ronnie James Dio. And I had never heard of this guy at the time, and then I bought this album, Heaven and Hell, and I thought, oh my God, these guys are great. That was one of my very favorite albums early on it's still in my top 5 albums of all time. This band is the only rock band that I have that has, in my estimation, 6 albums that I classify as Grandmaster albums, like great albums. And they have more than anybody else, but they also have a lot of issues too. And they just haven't really, they've had different eras of their stuff, and some of it I've liked quite a bit, some of it not as much. I haven't really disliked anything they've put out. But that early era, their first 5 or 6 albums, I don't think anybody else has that. Maybe we go back to the band I mentioned before, Van Halen. They're maybe the 1 or 2 bands that have put out just such solid albums right from the start. Anyways, the next band up, my number 5 right now, they've been as low as 7 in this group and as high as 3. And they continue to put out classic albums. Like their last 3 albums have been almost as good as anything they put out in the 70s. But they just had that long period in between where it just steadily went down to the point where I just said, oh my God, this stuff, I can't even handle any of it. So, but, I think they're pretty solid now. They've had problems with some of the internal members that have left the band. I'm talking about Styx, but I love them right now. The stuff they're putting out now is top shelf. That album, Crash of the Crown, was probably my favorite album this year. Great stuff. So Styx comes in at number 5. Number 4, maybe the greatest live band of all time. Certainly one of the greatest, if not the greatest music writer of all time. And they just, like, the 4 of them are just like so much, man. And they had influence on so many different genres of music too. A lot of punk movement came from these guys, I think. But they've put out some great music on disc as well. I just think their live stuff is so much better. I'm talking about The Who. I love Pete Townsend. The guy is just gifted when it comes to putting music together. And he's still doing it. Like that album they put out in 2019, and even the one they put out in 2006, they had gone a long time without putting out music. Both are great albums. I really like the newest one. I like every track on it. One of my favorite albums in the last few years. So there you go. Who's number 4? Number 3, Progressive Giants, spawning like a lot of really great music and splintering into some of the solo stuff that the other guys does. I like a lot of that as well. We're talking about Genesis. Peter Gabriel, one of the great frontmen of all time. Not just a singer. I mean, if it was just his voice, he would be okay. He'd be good. His voice is good, but it's just his whole persona on stage, and his lyricism is just top shelf. The way in which they structure their music was really good, especially their early stuff. I think Tony Banks is very underrated as a keyboard player and music writer. You can say what you want about Phil Collins. He's a fantastic drummer. He has a great voice. His cover of some of the earlier Genesis stuff is really good. His vocal range maybe a little bit more than Peter Gabriel was, but they have a similar voice. Similar in the sense that they can do the music together, but they're different, of course, in quite a bit of ways. I just think that, unfortunately, Genesis, for me, the reason they don't get to the top shelf, the number 1 position, and probably never will, was because a lot of the stuff that they put out in the 80s and beyond was just poppy, and there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of bands went that direction. Some have come back a little bit this way, but Genesis never did, and their last album is probably their worst album. But they toured recently, and even though Phil Collins is like not in the best of physical shape, he still got the voice, still got it. And I love all the members of Genesis. I really like the stuff that Steve Hackett's doing now. He may be the only member of the band who's actually playing really good Genesis stuff, and he of course still does it very well. Great guy. I just think he's fantastic. So now we're going to move on to my top 2, which probably won't be as any surprise since it's a process of elimination, right? So Yes is number 2, but they weren't always number 2. They've been as high as number 1. When Rush went into their synth era, I call it, after Signals, I was very disappointed in Power, in Grace Under Pressure, and even more so in Power Windows, and I just completely dropped the ball and just want nothing to do with it. Yes had taken over at that point and became my favorite band, and they were that from about 82, 83 until the turn of the century. So a good 20 years they were number 1 during the dead eras for me. So they're my number 1 over nothing, really. So Rush was number 1. They took over from Kiss, and then Genesis took over from Rush, and now Rush came back. I really like the stuff they've put out in the past 2 decades. Even some of that stuff that I had a problem with, I can listen to it a bit. I still can't listen to Power Windows or Presto. That was a turd, sorry. for me. But Yes is my number 2 band. I love Steve Howe. He's my favorite guitar player. I love the music. They put out some of the best albums ever. From probably from the Yes album right through to Tornado and right through to Drama. I loved all those albums. 5 classics among them. Some of them are close to that as well. Some have grown on me, like Relayer's grown a lot on me over the years. Even though I had it initially when I was young, it continues to grow on me. With every time I listen to it, I like it more. So Yes comes in at number 2. New album pushed aside. I won't discredit them for that. And then, of course, number 1 was never going to be anybody but Rush. They've been number 1. Initially, they replaced Kiss. Then they went for 18, 19, 20 years where they were number 2. And now they're back to number 1 and been that way for almost 2 decades now. I love all of their stuff. I have all of their stuff. They're the only band that I have everything that they've done. Great band. Maybe the best rock band of all time. I love the fact that they're Canadian. I love the fact that they are tight-knit with each other and almost like family. And they're down to earth. They didn't have a lot of the excesses that a lot of bands have. And all 3 of them are mastercraft musicians in their own field. They're all top line. Nobody has the kind of abilities as a group that they have, in my estimation. And they've got 5 master albums and a whole bunch of really good stuff other than that. Anyways, so there you have it. My top 25 rock bands of all time. My favorites. And I'll just reiterate them. Rush number 1, Yes number 2, Genesis number 3, The Who number 4, Styx number 5, Black Sabbath number 6, Jethro Tull number 7, Led Zeppelin number 8, Kiss number 9, Supertramp number 10, Rainbow number 11, Pink Floyd number 12, Iron Maiden number 13, BTO number 14, AC/DC number 15, Van Halen number 16, Heart number 17, Cheap Trick number 18, Judas Priest number 19, and the Eagles number 20. Number 21, Blue Oyster Cult. Number 22, Deep Purple. Number 23, Whitesnake. Number 24, Nectar, joining the ranks. And number 25, Triumph. The honorable mentions, I've got 5 bands who've had different periods of time, have been a lot higher than they are. The Rolling Stones I liked quite a bit when I was younger. I listened to them quite a bit. I haven't listened to them as much in recent years, but they're still a notable band, put out a lot of great stuff, and are still doing, they still look good in concert. You can say what they're about their age and that, but they still perform very well. King Crimson, a band who's steadily grown with me, probably came into existence back in when I found out that Bill Bruford, that's where he went, but I didn't listen to much of the stuff. I hear a song here or there. I heard a song that April Wine covered by them, and I didn't like the song, so I said, I'm not going to go there. But I eventually started moving towards it, and then when I started doing this, when I bought the Nectar albums, I also bought In the Court of the Crimson King, and I played, that's still on my playlist, and it's just as high as Nectar, so very good stuff. Thin Lizzy goes without saying. Phil Lynott is one of the great rockers of all time. And he's had some really good bandmates, Robbo and Scott Gorham, who's my particular favorite, and even Phil Sykes. Anyways, Thin Lizzy, some great albums. I really love their Thunder and Lightning album. I think it's underrated. Should be, and I play it all the time. Cold Sweat's my favorite song by them. The Sweet. Here's a band who I have known all of their chart stuff over the years, and I kind of liked it. It was kind of, and I just thought the band was kind of quirky. It was a little too poppy for my taste, but I did like their Fox on the Run and some of their Wee Willie and Ballroom Blitz. I thought they were kind of interesting songs, but it's their deeper stuff that really has put them on the map for me. They got a lot of heavy stuff that I didn't realize they had. And Leonard Skinner, I had a collection by them that I really liked and played a lot. And I liked some of their southern bluesy kind of feel to their music. And I've actually begun to listen to a lot more of that stuff as well. So there you have it. 5 honorable mentions. Could have done more, but 5's good enough. And anyways, that's it. There's my top 25 bands of all time, my favorites. You tell me your favorites. Put them in the comments below. If you liked me doing this, I'm going to do more stuff, but if you like me doing it, I'll do more quicker. If not, I can go back to what I was doing. And I hope that you like this video quite a bit. And if you do, subscribe and tell me more about what you would like to hear. So there you have it. I'm going to be doing a couple look backs in the next couple days, and also what was the other plan? There was something else I had in the work. I can't remember. It went out of my head for a minute. Oh, I think it's a live album, another live experience, we call it, from a classic live album that many people know about. I think it's one of the great live albums of all time, and it's an album that should be shared with people, and I want to share it. So we're doing that too. So there you have it. So from Prog Monster, I hope you have a great day. Take care.